Hello, everyone. Today we're recording our second episode of Cultural Animals, the Museum Leadership Lab. And today we bring Adam Smith, the Executive Director of Exploration Place. It's one of the most innovative places and active museums that I have seen in the latest years. So I'm super excited about having Adam here at the podcast. Adam, welcome.
Hi, Antonio. Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. So, hey, funny that we have another person from the UK, like just two UK persons in consecutive. Can you tell us a little bit about your origin story?
Sure. Yeah, I guess like Nick, I've probably got a transatlantic accent now. I lived and worked the first 29 years of my life in Britain, where I'm from, and I've been in the US now for 25 years. So my family all think I talk like an American, but Americans seem to think I talk like a Brit. So I was born and raised in Northern England, and I think museums have been a really important part of my life. I got my first job in a museum when I was 17 years old, and it's all really I've ever known or done. And
what were you doing when you were 17?
It was, we had a local heritage centre, Pendle Heritage Centre. It's still going in Barrowford, Lancashire, and it's covers the local history of the area. In 1612, we famously had witches were arrested and put to trial and eventually put to death. So that's one of the big stories of that local area. So my job then was just helping to run the museum. I was part of the weekend staff. And even today, actually, the fact that I did 5 years just selling tickets, working the gift shop, working in the cafe, I think a good grounding, actually, because even today I've got many young people who are college age students doing those kind of jobs. And I think it helps me understand their reality a little bit, that I did it myself. Came a point in my life where you got to decide, what are you doing as a career? And I knew that I wanted history to be part of it. I've always been really passionate about history. So it was like, well, I could be a history teacher or an archaeologist or museum.
So you're a teacher as well?
Yeah. I think I was really on the edge whether to do archaeology or museums. And I'd actually been accepted to a really great archaeology program. And I got quite a large grant from the government that would have paid me quite well for that. But there was one day I went up to St Andrews in Scotland to interview for their museum studies course, and I just fell in love with the city. Even though I had no government grant to do that, I decided to go and pursue museums, and to some degree drawn by just my passion for that place. And it's one of the best decisions of my life, actually. And when you look back, people talk about these sliding doors moments, and I'm glad I chose museums. So I got a museum studies degree, and that set me on a path. Worked a few jobs in Scotland, and then came over here. And that's probably the other big sliding doors moment in my life, was deciding to move to America. And again,
how did that happen, Adam?
Well, my first real job out of college, I ran a local history museum in a town called Methil in Scotland for a couple of years. And then I did 5 years at the Museum of Flight in Scotland. It was part of the National Museums of Scotland. And that was one of the great times in my life. I just found myself in the right place at the right time with a tremendous amount of freedom. At the time, the National Museums Organization, they were building what in dollar terms would be $100 million museum in the center of Edinburgh, and nobody seemed to care what was going on at this satellite museum that I was running just outside of Edinburgh. And for me, it was just perfect. I was full of ideas and enthusiasm, and we were able to make a lot of progress there in a very short period of time. And I think probably started to catch some attention. We won some nice awards as an organization, and I came over to the US in 1999 uh, to complete my pilot's license. I was learning to fly, but I also did a tour of aviation museums in the US. I wanted to take in some of the greats like the Smithsonian, and I gave a talk. There used to be an annual convention of aviation museums in DC, and a few weeks after giving that talk, I got an email from Oshkosh, Wisconsin, from the EAA. They run the world's largest air show there every year, and also they have a world-class aviation museum. And the email said, "Are you interested in running the EAA museum?" And until that point, the thought of living and working in America had never even crossed my mind. I never imagined it. And at first, I actually thought that I couldn't do it because my mother would be upset with me, like moving thousands of miles away from home. But it turned out when I talked to my parents that they said, we always thought America would be perfect for you. And so it proved. I do feel, like I said, it's one of the most fundamental decisions of my life, and quite an important one, because even in my late 20s, I was feeling that I was possibly reaching the ceiling of what I could achieve in the UK. And coming to America, without question, opened up like literally a whole new world of opportunities. And while I've had sort of ups and downs in my time here, I do not regret moving at all. And thankfully, the internet and the whole growth of the internet means I've felt like I've stayed connected to my family pretty well.
Do you go back often to UK?
Yeah, I do. I think on average, I've gone back a couple of times a year. One of the things that making that move across the Atlantic, it's definitely an asset having a British accent in the United States.
It is.
Sort of curiously, people over here hear my accent, and in their minds they start seeing pictures of Buckingham Palace, and like it seems to represent culture in a very positive way that's definitely helped me. So if your listeners are in the US, you may not know that my accent personally to British people is much more
Americanized.
Well, my original accent is reminiscent of sort of coal mines and the industrial north of England. It's not so much culture, but yeah, it definitely a good move for me, and it I mean, I've got to say, I felt very welcomed by the people of America from day one. It's been a wonderful experience, and on day one, if you told me I would eventually become a US citizen, I would have said, no way. I'm British. I'm proud of where I came from and proud of my country. But I will, it took me a while, but 2 years ago, I did take the oath and become a US citizen.
2 years? After how long?
So, well, I lived here 22, 23 years before doing that. And some of it, I think I wanted to get to a place where in my own heart, in my own belief, I wanted to do this for the right reasons. And I've sometimes said that Britain is a free country, but in the US, there's about 5% more freedom. And in that 5%, there are actually some things that are not great, but there are also some things that are fundamentally really great and really important. And I've actually come to value very much. So I think I just got to this point where I felt I want to be a full citizen, but when the World Cup comes around next summer, I'm still supporting.
It's gonna be a tough one.
I'm still supporting England.
So Adam, quick question. And then you came to the United States, and you were doing the aviation museum.
Yeah.
What's your favorite aviation museum in the US? Because there's a lot.
Great question. Because there are, in fact, 600 aviation museums in the US, which is itself quite amazing. Because the first flight was only 122 years ago, and already we've got 600 museums dedicated to this thing. There's lots of different flavors of aircraft museum, and I think I am gonna say the EAA museum that I ran for 11 years is my favorite, and because what that museum represents is the human spirit expressed through aviation in a way that I think is really special. EAA stands for Experimental Aircraft Association. The original experimental aviators were the Wright brothers. They invented the airplane, and in a very, very cool way. And the museum tells the story of how individuals have expressed the human desire to advance technology, advance exploration. When Burt Rutan and his team built the first private spaceship in 2004, they came right out of the EAA culture. So, and it sort of proved that 100 years after the Wright brothers, it was still possible. That was a small team of people, but they changed the world because by saying that space travel, space exploration doesn't belong to governments, it can belong to the people. They paved the way for things like SpaceX, no question. And look at how SpaceX is changing the world that we live in right now. And so for me, there is a special place in my heart for EAA and its mission. And also it was a big part of my personal development. I spent a good chunk of my career there and had the opportunity to meet some very interesting people and got some really good mentorship, people that helped to, shape me and who I am.
I can't imagine. How did you went to work at Comic-Con?
Well, Comic-Con came a little bit later. So I had this long spell in my life, starting in Scotland and then coming here to the US, where aviation and me were very closely connected. So,
well, you got your pilot license,
right?
Right.
It sort of transcended just being my job. It became a life, and you pilot's license and built, and just aviation for many people is also a passion and a lifestyle, and I fully embrace that. So I was with an organization in Dallas called Commemorative Air Force. The organization owns and operates the largest collection of flying World War II airplanes in the world. And I was helping to move the CAF from Midland, Texas, which is not a great place to try and run a museum of scale. We ended up moving the headquarters to Dallas, but I felt my time there was coming to an end. And I think I was feeling that in career terms, I'd perhaps become typecast, like you're the aviation guy. But I was possibly feeling that like I wanted to explore more than just airplanes. And when the opportunity with Comic-Con came up, it was like, oh, wow, there's a job that I could really have some fun with that. It appeals to a different part of my passion, possibly a way to stop myself being typecast. And actually at that point, the opportunity to do something, it's a rare opportunity to start a museum from nothing, with some resourcing to be able to, because I'd always worked in museums where the facility and the culture had been set by my predecessors, but maybe there was the opportunity with Comic-Con to do that from scratch. So that was a very intense couple of years in my life. working there in San Diego, positives and negatives. By the way, one of the big positives, your previous interviewee, Nick Honey, said that BPOC is a great organization. I really enjoyed my relationships there with the museum community in Balboa Park. And what Nick has done with BPOC is I have sat in so many meetings in my life that talk about shared services and how if we combine services, we can get more efficiency, and it almost never happens. But BPOC is possibly the only example at scale that I know where a shared service really works and works very, very well. And I think, as you learned in your time with Nick, a lot of that's down to great leadership. So yeah, Comic Con was a great environment to be in. Learned a lot, and I've definitely carried a lot of that into my time here at Exploration Place. Probably one of the biggest things that I would say to any museum leader is connecting your programming to popular culture is a good move. I think every museum, certainly that I've ever worked at, and in my observation, the challenge for most museums is that you're covering some specialized subject, aviation or, what science, as I am right now, or natural history, or whatever it is. And you've got this sort of deep specialization in what your museum is all about. But most of the rest of the world is operating in a different mentality, and pop culture can be a really great bridge from your deep specialty to the ordinary people. And if there's been a consistent thread of my career going back to Scotland and just what I am trying to do, I think it is being that bridge builder. When I got the job in the Aviation Museum in Scotland, I had never flown in an airplane. I knew nothing about airplanes. And suddenly I'm surrounded by people that know everything, like to an incredibly deep level. And that it's like never forget that feeling, because most of the rest of the world, your potential visitation are the people that don't know very much. And if I feel I've got a professional skill, it is in trying to find those opportunities to connect ordinary people into the wonderful world of the museum.
And Adam, like I was telling Nick, like I was at the New England Air Museum this year during the summer, and they can allow you to go into two planes at that moment, and one of them was one of those World War II planes, and you can just sit down in the cockpit and you're like, you have this thing, and oh my God, like you can just imagine yourself and like all these feelings go and you're like, oh, because there was that time there were no computers, like everything was done by hands. It was a miracle that these things just fly. And it was like, wow.
New England Air Museum is a good one. I like that. It's the close. I've often said it's the closest museum in North America to the one I used to run in Scotland. Really top-notch collection. The buildings are a little bit older. Look, everything's crammed in. But
what was super interesting? Like complete, like all the airplanes maintained by volunteers.
Yeah.
Amazing. So we would go into they will take us into the back, and there were a bunch of obviously old folks, working on fixing the planes and keeping them in shape. It was amazing to see.
In fact, I will say, on both sides of the Atlantic, wherever I've worked in whatever place, whatever subject matter, one of the consistent threads that has always inspired me is volunteers. It has been the joy of my working life, actually, to work with volunteers. And this is the big lesson of organizations like EAA and Comic Con, that if you think about the events that those organizations run, they deploy thousands of volunteers collectively to do something that just couldn't be done any other way. And it's, I don't know, I went back to Scotland this past summer and met some friends from my time there. And I started a project with them in the year 1999, and they completed the project last year. Those
Way.
volunteers, they built a World War One airplane, Sopwith 1.5 strutter, and over 25 years they hand built and eventually flew a absolutely immaculate replica of a World War One airplane. And I mean, stuff like that is, for me, it's unbelievable. And every single moment of that journey is volunteer driven.
It's crazy. So, Adam, you've mentioned a couple of times, that I think that as everyone in life, once have its ups and lows in in their careers. What can you tell us a little bit about one of those struggles that you thought it's like, oh man, this one was hard. That you thought is like, okay,
Yeah, I mean, first of all, when talking to younger people, trying to give them career advice, one of the things I say is you have to have negative experiences. You have to you got to touch the fire sometimes, to know that fire burns you. And I think the trick though is try and keep the negative learning experiences short and try and keep the positive learning experiences long. And generally, I think I've succeeded in that in my working life. I will say I've got an observation looking back that the governance structure and the governance of an organization is really fundamental. Here in the US, typically that's the board of directors of an organization or the board of trustees. Where there is a strong and capable and functional board, that is where, not just in my working life, but where I observe around me, that's where you see success, strength, stability, progress. Where there is dysfunction, is where you will not see progress. And I think that's definitely been the case in my working life, where I've hit problems or frustrations. There's usually issues at the board, and it's why here in Wichita it's been such a joy for me, because the greatest thing my predecessor left me was an amazing board, and when I've got that, I've been able to make pretty significant progress. In Scotland, it was a little bit different because, as I mentioned, I was working for the National Museums, and it was
government.
a little bit of a different structure. That was just more. I didn't seem to have a board. I could just do what I wanted. In fact, in retrospect, I'm like, I can't believe what I got away with. But but we were able to make extremely rapid progress extremely quickly. And there is a school of thought that the most efficient form of leadership is benevolent dictatorship. And in that particular case, it probably worked out.
Oh man. And what are the things and that you're seeing other museums kind of struggling, that you said is like, hey, what are the things that you're seeing like out there, especially we're going through these kind of special circumstances in the museum industry right now. And what are some of the things that you see sometimes, like these are common things that museums are struggling. Yeah, the board may be one of them, but there are others that come to your mind.
Boards is a common one. I think, first of all, museums are not easy because they're pretty complex operations, complex expectations about them. Like in my current role, I'm running a museum, but I've also got to be an expert in food and beverage and retail and running a movie theater, and and in this sort of weird environment where some proportion of your audience thinks that everything should be free, and so that there's definitely sort of complexities that you've got to get your head around. And I think one of the things I feel is that your mission is really important, and keeping your organization closely attached to what your core purpose is. And I find that that becomes quite a good compass, because 10 times a day, somebody's telling me that I need to do something, and pitching ideas, partnerships, suggesting it's our moral obligation to support a social cause, or what, there's just so many different things. And I find that having the mission at the center of your thought process and decision process, it helps to bring some clarity towards what we decide to do and what we don't decide to do. And in some ways, like, the decisions, what you decide not to do, are sometimes even more important than or the things that you decide to stop doing. One of the things I found in nonprofit work is that nonprofits find it very, very difficult to stop doing something that they started doing. And it's actually really easy to start programs. And so I've, first of all, developed probably a much stronger backbone than I had 30 years ago, in terms of being capable of just saying, we're not doing it anymore. It doesn't make sense. And finding diplomatic ways to extricate yourself from something that doesn't make sense for the organization anymore. And also being more careful and considerate on the front end. You don't want to crush creativity and entrepreneurial thinking and the good forces that causes people to want to create new programs, but be cognizant that when you take a new program on, you're accepting a significant new workload, and you need to think about that.
That's so interesting. Yeah, absolutely, and even for example, us as a software vendor, I remember having this conversation with somebody from San Diego too. Somebody who actually had this naval ship, and then people will go into the ship and then they do this. And he was telling me about something very similar to what you were saying. He's like, I have to, like, people expected to be for free, but then when you say, it's like, no, like, we're gonna charge for this so you can have a better experience, instead of just giving you a cheap experience, because we didn't have this and this and that. It's like, no, we're gonna give you a, we want to, kind of charge you a fair price for that, right? And it was interesting because we were very young when we were dealing with this thing, and he was like, no, if you're going to build a feature, like, you have to charge for it because you have to maintain it. You want to make sure that the feature does the job. So if you should just charge for it. And actually, it was an interesting lesson for us as well.
One of the things that I've developed a significantly stronger backbone on is pricing. And I think in the museum world, there is this sort of pressure to charge the least amount of money possible for something. There's just a mentality that our job is to keep it as cheap as possible. I'll give you an example. When I came here to Exploration Plays, we have a dome theater, so it's not technically an IMAX, but a large format theater, and it's a really good theater, and we show really good films in it, good quality projectors. And I came here, and the ticket price was really low. It's $5 per ticket, and I've got a general sense of where the market is for something like that, and we're way under it. So I said to the staff, "Why are we only charging $5 for this?" Well, the people of Wichita will only pay $5 for for something like this. And if we put the price up, they'll complain. And, also we've got poor people in this community and, they can't afford more than $5, etc. So being the kind of person that I am, I spent one evening. I do get pretty intense sometimes, as you have learned as someone I work with on a business level. I spent one evening and I went to every website I could find, made a little spreadsheet, what's everybody else charging? Okay. And I cannot find a single other IMAX or Dome theater that's charging less than $8 in the world, except Exploration Place, we're charging $5. So long story short, we moved our price to $8. Here's the interesting thing. More people started coming to the Dome Theater. So not only are we making more revenue per ticket, like literally more people are coming because you can charge so little for something that people don't believe there's any value there to it. Human beings carry around all the time they're doing this sort of mental calculation, this relationship of offering to value. And so there's, I think several times in my life, we've had this long discussion about raising prices and it's never gone badly, actually. And we just actually did it this past summer. We raised our prices fairly significantly. And I have not had a single complaint. And it's really helped our organization. And part of my philosophy, I think I picked this up at EAA in particular. I do care about people. I don't want money to be an economic barrier to coming to my museum or my summer camp or whatever it is. I think one of the things that I picked up in America, I sort of call it like the Robin Hood philosophy of museum management, which is take from the rich and give to the poor. And we ran a summer camp at EAA, and one of he's dearly departed now, Chuck Larson there, he said, if a kid really wants to come to our camp, we will find a way. We will get him here. Now that was a $2,000 camp. But if a kid really wanted to come to camp, we always got him there. And I've tried to structure my programming that way. Last year at Exploration Place, we had 400,000 visitors, but I let 39,000 people in for nothing. And we have ways of finding the people that we don't want money to be a barrier to people coming in here.
Yeah, pricing is it's funny. Pricing is interesting in both in the nonprofit and the for-profit world. Just to tell you finish you the story about the naval ship. The director didn't come to us, and you know what he says? Like, you're too good to be true. Like, you're so cheap. Lesson learned.
Interesting. Was that the Midway, the aircraft carrier?
I can't remember, but I remember the story because he was like, oh my God. And it's like, we changed the pricing like immediately because then again, kind of what you were saying is like people have that relationship pricing and quality. And like we were operating, we were doing everything that needed to be done. But he's like, I'm so sorry. And then he's like, I can't believe your pricing. And I was like,
so low, I'm suspicious of it.
Yeah. Because we were kind of starting and he's like, I can't believe it. I can't believe you're doing this for this. And it's like, okay, next time, stuck in a couple of years. But this is an interesting lesson. And I think that people are yes, very, very afraid of the impact. And the interesting thing is also that you have so much power over it. Like if it's not working, just come down again if you want to, right? Like it's like just experimenting never hurts.
Right. You can always discount.
You can always go down. And so, because you mentioned the boards is such a common thing, what will be good advice for museum leaders that are struggling with their boards or that are putting together a board for the museum or cultural institution? What are the things that you will recommend them or that you know,
Yeah.
conflict of pain
Um,
that you feel the burn and
a
then you're like,
big,
okay.
first of all, it is difficult. A museum leader that is struggling with a dysfunctional or difficult board, it is very, very difficult. It's a difficult spot to be in. We had a situation here in Wichita a couple of years ago. I went out for drinks with a colleague, and she just poured her heart out about the difficulty she was having with her board. And on my way home from that, I was I was crying in my car. I was in tears because I have been there myself where she was, and it can be very, very stressful. Um, I One little clue is that I have become a very strong believer in the value of term limits on boards. Um, I think that is one of the biggest protections against board dysfunction that I have observed, just as a general rule. Like if I was being recruited for another job, that is one of the top filters that I would put it through based upon my experience. The argument against term limits for board members is you'll lose a really good board member who's contributing a lot to your organization. I think what I've learned from organizations that do have term limits is that no, you don't. You do not lose that person. They may take a year off and you can bring them back for another term.
Mhm.
But you will not, if they're a good one,
Lose it.
you don't lose them. But what you do lose is the ones you need to lose.
Yeah.
And it's, I've seen that again, just to some degree in reflecting on organizations I've worked for, but organizations that, other observations I've got of others is that seems to be that now. Have I got other advice? I don't know. I feel like that's an area where I still need advice from others. It's difficult, but actually maybe rely on your professional colleagues, other people in the same situation in other organizations. They can help you a lot. Dear friend of mine, Ralph Bafano. I feel guilty that when you asked me my favorite aviation museum, I didn't say Museum of Flight in Seattle because Ralph is he made that the great international institution that it is. He's retired now, but over 25 years, he has been such a good friend, like a shoulder to cry on or a source of good advice or whatever. And I think particularly when when dealing with board issues, getting advice from your colleagues can help.
And that's one of the things that we were talking with Nick the other day. We're saying that it's lonely at the top, right? And making those connections in which you are able to ask questions and you're like, hey, we're having this situation, we're having this other situation. It's uh, such a big asset, I think, for everyone on their careers. Um, and what would be kind of your definition of a successful museum?
That's I'm probably overthinking your question because museums succeed in all kinds of different ways. I mean, the quick answer is, a museum that is accomplishing its mission is a successful museum. And I love the mission statement we have here at Exploration Place because it starts with a couple of really great words. Our mission is to inspire a deeper interest in science and technology through creative and fun experiences for all. But actually, the most important words for me are those first two, to inspire. And I feel that any museum that is inspiring its audience is succeeding on some level because I feel that that's sort of like fundamentally, that's what resonates with me personally. And to be able to fire someone up make them passionate to learn more. And yeah, that's my answer.
That's a good one. Adam, so we kind of wanted to do this podcast. It was really, again, we're going through this phase in which, a lot of museums struggling financially. And to me, kind of what you've seen, like your numbers are amazing in terms of visitation and nations and memberships. And I wonder if there's any wisdom that you can share to other museum leaders that are, kind of struggling in this. Is like, yes, we want to make sure that we make this mission, but we also have these obligation to be, financially viable, right? And so what are one of those things that you think is like, oh man, museums usually do these very bad. And we talked a little bit about pricing. We talked a little bit about cutting programs that are no longer working. What other things you've seen as inefficiencies that you're like, oh man, should do better? You've pushed us very hard on like freaking page to be like convert super easy. That's that which we definitely appreciate. But what other things are you seeing that are not being done right in other museums and cultural institutions?
Well, all I can do is share my experience because one of the things about museums is there's so many different flavors of museum. There's so many different models of funding that it's hard to give universal advice to all. I read something recently said that there's more museums in the United States than Starbucks and McDonald's put together. But Starbucks and McDonald's are fairly simple businesses. Museums are just, they're all over the map. I think in general, for me, marketing has been a significant source of finding a cutting edge or a competitive edge. A lot of the success that I've had when I've had it has been joined at the hip with a successful marketing program. And it was actually probably the biggest challenge that I felt crossing the Atlantic was the change in marketing environment. I'd had this run in Scotland where we really, I think we quadrupled the attendance in the 5 years I was there and really did some great things. And I came to America and realized that I can't market my museum the way I could back in Scotland.
It's interesting.
In Scotland, at the time I worked there were 2 commercial radio stations covering the entire nation. Then I come to Oshkosh, Wisconsin, town of 50,000 people, and there's 20 commercial radio stations, and they all want the same money, And so I felt I had a problem, and I will say I felt I struggled my first few years in the US with this transition because I went from an environment where I can communicate with the people that I want to communicate with to a point where I can't afford to communicate with the people that I want to communicate with. And eventually I found my feet. And I will say that the rise of social media has been one of the most helpful things to me personally, because it gives you the ability to communicate in a very precise way with, it gives you the freedom and the empowerment to build your own audience. It gives you the ability to communicate with them. Actually, just last night, I was sitting with a colleague at a Christmas event, and he tells me that he's not allowed by policy to have a TikTok account. And I'm like, you're kidding me. And I actually got kind of animated in this conversation, like, man, you got to push back on this. And it's not that TikTok it's like an okay channel for marketing. We've had a few that we've put out that millions of people have found, and it's good and things like that. I don't think it's driving a ton of attendance, but I was animated because the principle that you can't build your own audience and communicate with them by policies like, ooh, that scares me a little bit because that's been very, very important to me. And
How many, like, how do you manage your marketing in your organization? Like, do you have an outside agency or do you have like an internal team?
well, I'll tell you that in we I have had a good run here at Exploration Place. I think in the 6 years I've been here,
Amazing,
we've
Adam.
effectively doubled our attendance and really fired up the programming and things like that. I will at the heart of that, I think we've brought some energy to creative programming, but the marketing aspect, which includes hiring a good marketing staff, but making a big shift of spend. By the way, we're currently spending half of the marketing dollars that we used to spend. I felt we had this very inefficient model. All the money was going on legacy media, TV advertising, radio advertising, print
Okay.
advertising, and we just kind of we had an agency that was doing it all. And that's not a model that I can be successful in. We made a big shift to digital, all digital, very precise. And where the previous model, like we couldn't market anything without spending a minimum $10,000 on it. But in the world of a museum, there's often programs. I got one coming up this weekend, and there'll be 3,000 attendees, something like that. And I haven't really got $10,000 to spend on it. I need a marketing campaign that we can put $2,000 on or something. And so being able to just redoing the marketing model, I do think was very empowering. And, we're able to find some pretty good efficiencies. One of the things that like any 501c3 nonprofit in the US, any museum listening to this, you are eligible for $10,000 per month of free advertising through Google Grants. I mean, that is available to any museum. The average museum in the US pulls about $200 a month out of that program because they haven't invested the time or they're technically scared of it or whatever. I will tell you, I am pulling, or Exploration Place is pulling $10,000 per month of free advertising from Google right now. And first of all, no credit to me. That's my Erin Manning, my VP of marketing, and an amazing team that built us up to that. But I'm finding a long-winded way to answer your question about how do you
This is gold.
how do you
This is
grapple
gold.
with the economics of a museum, which are always tough. And I will say that some of what I'm talking about, this has been with me from day one. Like my career has basically evolved along with the internet generation. Like as I was starting my career, the internet was starting, and I've always tried to position my organizations and my work a step ahead of. Maybe I've always felt I've been a step ahead of where the average museum is. So, like real early, just having a book out in the museum where there was this new thing called email, but for me, it's like, wow. So there's a way that I can communicate directly at no cost with the people that want to hear from me. So just having a book where people would leave their email address and hand typing those into a database. Obviously, things like that have evolved very significantly, but the principle is the same. Any museum, any size, is empowered to create an audience and build it, and you can monetize it.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, Anna, because I know that you have a hard stop, but I wanted to tell you that every time that I visited Exploration Place, so one of the things that like it was kind of like the team that you had in place not only was always top notch and committed, but also uh, very vocal about your leadership and how great you were as a leader. Which it was interesting because you could tell by the energy in the museum while we were working there. So
Well, thanks for
congratulations.
passing that on. They don't tend to mention that to me. It's
Oh no, no,
it,
it was pretty crazy. We were going working with one department and working with another department and working with another department, and it was a common comment. It was a
It's
very
nice.
common.
Well, it's nice to hear, and thanks for feeding it back to me. I think one of the lessons I picked up, and again, EAA was a very important part of my personal development. One of the people that talked me into moving over here. There's a guy called Mike Dale. He's British, but he came over to the US and he ran Jaguar cars for a long time, a brand that's built on quality. And Mike's in the field of automotive, a legend, and very, very helpful to me and really got me thinking a lot about culture in organizations and the deep power of culture. You cannot change culture overnight. You grind on that every day. You're moving a flywheel. And I'm 6 years into this job here, and I'm only just getting started on some of the cultural aspects that I'm working on. But culture can be a very, very powerful force. And I feel it as a manager, the people you hire, you really make a difference when you hire. And I try and attend every interview, even quite a junior level in our organization, because I am filtering for culture. I'm filtering for mindset and alignment with mission and things like that. And so I think I'm glad you were struck by the alignment of our team, because we work really hard on communications and just trying to be a true team as a culture.
Yeah, it was interesting because sometimes speakers say, well, you can put investment in training and you can put investment in you know I don't know, cultural things around it, but it is like it's nothing compared to the impact of good hiring and good hiring practices. Because that's where you say like, okay, this is if you're gonna put a lot of investment into kind of not high quality personnel, but it seems like you guys have this run very, very well. It is very impressive. Adam, who would you like to be next on this podcast? Who would you recommend for us to interview that you think is like, hey, who has like tons of nuggets for other museum leaders? You should interview this guy. Who would it be?
I think my thoughts turn to people that have inspired me, and that as I work in my day to day, I feel somehow I'm trying to channel their philosophy, or I'm hoping to make them happy. Rather than single one out, I'll give you two or three. First of all, National World War II Museum in New Orleans, to me, is one of the great museums that's been developed over the last generation. Very, very well led. And if you want like another transatlantic accent, it's led by a Scotsman called Stephen Watson. And so I give you Stephen's name. I admire the organization because it's, I think, perfectly poised at the intersection of mission, entrepreneurialism. They've done some groundbreaking things. They operate as a strong business, but their mission, that is a serious museum with serious scholars, and it's just, there is a purist in my heart that I love seeing museums do great things. So I'm I think Vince, I may pronounce his surname incorrectly, Kadluchek at Meow Wolf.
Okay.
I feel Meow Wolf is a very interesting arrival in the cultural space. Again, if in the last 10 years, what's happened that is really interesting to me is I'll never forget going to Meow Wolf for the first time, and how often do you go to a museum or an art gallery and there is a 2-hour wait to get in it because there's a line of people, and being connected, connecting mission to ordinary people and what they want to do. I think as an organization, that's a very interesting case study for any museum, even if you're not, you might be a history museum. I think that's all a bit abstract, but marketing, positioning, there's some, I think, very interesting organization. It's not a museum, but right now I am building, in 3 months from now, we're opening a huge expansion that I've been working on for the last 3 years. We're building a 6-acre, well, I don't want to call it a playground. It's 10 playgrounds in one really amazing space, and it's fairly deeply inspired. We find our own path, but the inspiration is in Tulsa, Oklahoma. They did an amazing public park called the Gathering Place, and I think that what they developed there in terms of play and a deep belief in quality standards. There's going to be hundreds of these built, and we'll probably be like the 5th or 6th. And the guy that was behind that, he works in Dallas now for the Trinity Park, but he's called Tony Moore, and he really inspired me, seriously inspired me. And I'm not sure, this is bizarre, but I only met him once. But
it took.
I got the message. It's all it took. Yeah, and in some ways, I just hope he's happy when we open ours.
Oh man, no, that's amazing. We'll reach out. Adam, thank you so much. This has been great. I think our audience will be thrilled. I mean, I think that what you said about marketing and this is such an underestimated superpower just to get that machine going.
Yeah, and see, maybe you actually just this deeper conversation helps you understand the business conversation that you and I are having, because it's you understand how important marketing is to me, and you and your business are a very important part of translating. The marketing's the top of the funnel.
Absolutely.
You are an important part of converting the interest that we're generating, the connections that we have, into the actual transaction, the visit, the donation, whatever it is.
Absolutely. No, it rings strong. It rings very strong, Adam. Adam, thank you so much. It was a pleasure. As soon as we get it out, we'll send it to you.
All right. Thanks, Antonio.
Adam, have a great rest of your day.
Okay, bye-bye. You too. See ya. Bye.
So first, thanks for listening, watching, and spending some time. We hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as we did. And if you'd like to catch more episodes of the Cultural Animals, the Museum Leadership Lab, please share and subscribe to the podcast. And you can listen to it on Apple Podcasts, or you can listen to it on Spotify, or rewatch the full episode on YouTube. Yes, I'm reading the thing. And then also, make sure to follow Vivart on LinkedIn and Facebook and X and whatever other social media I think we're going to put this down. And we'll be sharing more content and inviting other leaders from the museum and cultural industry. We definitely want more culture and more museums everywhere. So until then, please take care of my friend, and then we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.